Hey everybody, Edre here, and this is my third video today, so I'm sorry if I'm overwhelming everybody, but I really wanted to get this one out of the way. Depeche Mode time. Fifth Depeche Mode album I'm reviewing in my series. It's gonna be their fifth album. Black Celebration. Now, Black Celebration is, in my opinion, one of the best albums of all time, period. Definitely the best Depeche Mode album up to this point. I think that they hit it out of the park with this album. Not only did they go full force in embracing their more dark aesthetic, their more dark sounds, they also did keep some of that industrialness that they were building on Construction Time Again and Some Great Reward. You could hear that especially during some of the songs like Stripped and Fly on the Windscreen. You hear it quite a bit. But what is it about this album that makes it one of the greatest albums of all time? Well, for me, it's all in the content of like the lyrics and the instrumentation and the production. The production takes a huge step forward. I'm not saying the production on previous albums were not good, but this one really took it to the next level. Not only is it very ethereal, very dark sounding, is atmospheric and kind of all over the place. Some of these songs they work live. Some of them are a bit more album friendly, not as live friendly, but songs like Black Celebration, Fly on the Windscreen, and Stripped are songs that are going to be played live probably until they stop making music. This album is full of staples, which is tremendous. I mean, so many songs on here have become iconic Depeche Mode songs, and yet this album wasn't the biggest hit initially, which is something I find interesting. Nowadays, this album is widely regarded as being one of Depeche Mode's top albums in their entire career, but at the time, like if I look at the charts, it didn't chart that well in America. I mean, it cracked the 100, but it was just at 90. In Britain, however, this album was a bit bigger. So, I'm going to go first off into the state of the band. What was going on with the group? What that made this album so dark? Well, Martin at the time wrote a good amount of this album while living in Berlin. At least that's what I've heard from interviews. I don't have any 100% source, but if so, that makes a big, it makes sense why this album is a little bit darker. So, Berlin at the time in the mid-'80s was not like how it is today. I mean, it was separated by the Berlin Wall during the height of the Cold War. You had East Berlin, West Berlin. Big stark contrast there. Huge. And Depeche Mode was one of the most important groups during that time frame for Eastern Europe. I mean, obviously, they were much more controlling, like Eastern European communist governments were much more controlling over what people were listening to. But Depeche Mode kind of slipped through the cracks a lot. And this album, I think, was one of the turning points where they became such an influential band over there. Because they kind of did speak a lot about the stuff going on over there, even if it was through a bunch of artsy lyrics. You see, this album is very Martin-centric, I feel. Obviously, I said Martin was living over in Berlin, was obviously still the only songwriter on this album, but he sings more songs on this album than he does on previous ones, and I find that intriguing. A Question of Lust. Sometimes. It Doesn't Matter Too. Or 3 songs right back to back that are sung by Martin, something that hadn't been done before. And I feel like his contributions vocally play a huge part in why this album is as well known as it is, and what makes it stand out compared to the rest of their discography. To me, Black Celebration marks a turning point for them. I mean, I know I say this all the time about every single release, but I really do believe that this album is a turning point. Well, they were kind of waning a little bit away from some of the dark atmospheres on Some Great Reward. They went full force on this one. And the execution is excellent. Like, I want to talk about the song Stripped quite a bit. You know, Stripped would be out of place on any other Depeche Mode album, but it fits perfectly right in the middle of Black Celebration. And the song is so ominous, and so are many others on this album, that it keeps the song relevant throughout the decades since this album was released. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that all of these songs are written in a way that keeps them relevant, keeps them intriguing, and, makes them hold up better than, say, Speak and Spell, or, it hurts for me to say, A Broken Frame. Vocally, Dave is on top of his game here, without a doubt. Not only is vocal production great, but his tone on this album is fantastic. It's dark, and one of the songs that always has kind of stuck out to me vocally is which one? Is a New Dress, because that song has a really strange drum effect going on, and a very kind of I don't want to say dry, but I think you'd know what I'm saying if I bring that up. And Here Is the House is another one that Dave really shines bright vocally. And yeah, instrumentation-wise, the synths that are used on this album are amazing. They're much more softer than some of the more aggressive ones of their really early days, and it really adds to the whole aesthetic. And I guess overall, part of the background, I guess, of this album that makes it so iconic is kind of the fans' celebration of this album. I would argue that this is really one of the albums where they did bring much more of the goth community, much more of that stuff into their fan base, because their previous albums, they had some dark aspects, but this one really reached out to and kind of helped Depeche Mode build the cult following that they have today. And I think that's really important. In a lot of these songs, I think part of it adds to the cult aspect and why this album wasn't initially really successful, is that some of these songs they're just weird in a good way, obviously. It Doesn't Matter 2 has this weird vocal synth pad throughout it that is not pop friendly. That's not a song that you would imagine being played on the radio while you're, driving on the highway. And sometimes has this great echoey vocals with multi-layered vocals that are echoing, panning across from ear to ear. You also have World Full of Nothing, which is also very much like that. I think it's the production on this thing that really gave Depeche Mode that push to get more popularity in America and worldwide, and gain a following that was extremely loyal to them, and really makes them stand out compared to all of the other 80s bands that they were, alongside with. And overall, this album came together wonderfully. It remains one of their most celebrated works of art, and to me is I don't want to say peak Depeche Mode, because they have so many different sounds, but this is, I think, I know I use this in a lot of reviews, but Depeche Mode at this point was already, in my opinion, one of the greatest bands of all time by the time this album came out. Not only, the track list, flawless. Production, flawless. The origin behind it is also amazing to read about. The vocals, flawless. Everything about this is just, to me, it's one of the most perfect albums ever made. Depeche Mode, Black Celebration. Arguably one of their most important albums. I recommend everybody check out this album. It's wonderful, and I just think it needs more, as much praise as it can get. Music for the Masses is next. I hope you liked this review. It's a wonderful album, Black Celebration. Definitely the one that got me obsessed with them.